Welcome to the Real News Network. We're in the final morning at the People's Summit in Chicago. And now joining us to discuss the summit is a person who was in on the planning of the summit, Donna Smith, Executive Director of the Progressive Democrats of America. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Paul. It's good to be here with you.
So we were saying off camera, I think the first time I interviewed you was about 8 years ago.
It was.
When you were a healthcare advocate in D.C.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that's been very controversial over the weekend has been, what's the attitude to take towards the Democratic Party? What are the possibilities actually reforming the Democratic Party? And the Hillary Clinton presidency, candidacy, I should say.
Yes.
It's not a presidency yet. And there's a kind of undercurrent here of people that have fought so hard during the campaign and believe that Secretary Clinton is really part of the problem. She represents, in a sense, a section of the billionaire class that Senator Sanders has been critiquing. How do you get behind that? And I know the conference itself has not been framed around support the Clinton candidacy. It's been more about down ticket fights and what the movement does next. But there is a tension here. And what do you make of it?
That's a really good question. There is a tension, and certainly for Progressive Democrats of America, our organization was the organization that petitioned Bernie to run as a Democrat more than 2 years ago. Gave him about 12,000 signatures. We had gathered people asking him to run. It took a while for him to come to that decision, and more people weighed in with him, obviously, but PDA has always been very much behind Bernie's candidacy because of his stand on the issues and how closely they matched our own. So the work that's gone in the last 2 years has been enormous to get him to the place where he has gotten. I don't think anybody imagined at the beginning that he would make these kinds of inroads and that so many millions of Americans would say, that's our agenda too.
Yeah, this must have been as big a shock to you as anybody.
I think so. And every primary where he would win, we were like, wow, now we go on to the next one, and we go on to the next one. So you're right. For a few people here, we're just days after the California primary and the loss. Ballots are still being counted in California.
Or not
counted in California, when people are understandably some angry, some hurt, some sad, and the People's Summit has been a way for people to come together and say, Bernie has been saying from the beginning of his campaign, this is about movement. This is about building a movement, because even if we had a President Sanders, without a movement, you can't get anything done through Congress. You can't get any actual legislative policy accomplished. So to try and not pivot people away from the electoral process at the presidential level, because we still do have a convention at the end of July. It's not as if this is a completely done deal. Yes, I know folks would like to coronate Hillary right now, but the fact is there's still a delegate vote that has to take place on the floor in Philly. So you have delegates who, PDA alone has over 150 people in our network who are elected Bernie delegates. So when we look at those people and they say, wait a minute, I'm going to invest time, energy, money, getting to Philadelphia, being an active part of that delegation, they don't want to see that be for nothing. They don't want to feel like that wasn't meaningful. So the summit allowed them to come and start planning some things for beyond the end of July. I don't think any of us know exactly what will happen in Philadelphia.
Well, before we talk about Philadelphia, in the kind of moment of this conference, we were interviewing people and talking to lots of people, and there's some people are a little kind of what's the word? They're angry about the overall situation of what's happened with the Democratic Party. They're very angry at the DNC, and I'm sure the whole Sanders campaign is.
No one more than PDA. And I don't want to interrupt you, but the reality is that PDA has always stood for an insurgency in the Democratic Party, saying what we wanted to make sure that this party that really began as the party of working class Americans who were about wide democracy and a wide net, casting a wide net and bringing all groups.
Well, it didn't quite
has
begin
shifted.
that way. There were periods
It
where one
began
might.
this way, and yes, you're right. It morphed into things at different times in its history, but now has seemed to become kind of Democratic light somehow, or even if that.
Well, it's controlled by a section of the billionaires. I mean, just
Absolutely.
the hedge fund, a section of Wall Street, a section of Silicon Valley, a section of Hollywood.
So you sure hear people here who say, that's it, I'm done with the Democrats, I'm not going to touch either of the parties, they're all corrupt. Hard to argue with that position. PDA's position is that we are going to continue to be that insurgency that says to them, we can reform this party. Bernie Sanders says the party must be reformed, not just that we can, but that we must.
What do you think this leads? I don't know in what time span, but there is a certain point, if this insurgency gets strong enough and big enough and actually challenges for control of the party apparatus, that the money behind the Democratic Party is simply going to find some way to kind of block that, purge that. I mean, do you foresee in the future at some point this is where a third party actually comes from, is out of a real split in the Democratic Party?
I think over time, if the Democratic Party doesn't reform, I think that's more possible than, I think if they stay stuck, for instance, let's take the issue of Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And PDA has been pretty outspoken about the fact that she's done an inadequate and some would say a terrible job in managing through this primary process. You can talk about the debates and when they were scheduled or any number of things that seem to be in favor of Secretary Clinton and what was going to happen with her campaign. And the reality is now, okay, they've shifted her to another position apparently. They've reassigned her within the DNC structure. That's not quite the same as what the people were calling for, which was that she be removed from her position. So while, it's hard to imagine that this party is going to quickly make the kind of transition we'd like to see them make.
But the thing is, it's not a difference of like ideology primarily. It's not a difference of just policy. It's not what Secretary Clinton and the media talk about, that we all have the same objectives and it's just a different way to get there. This is a difference of fundamental, should I say, class interest.
Yes.
The billionaires like this kind of Wall Street. They like this kind of system, and they have a control over the Democratic Party apparatus. So it's either a question of, one of these groups in the end is going to have to go.
Well, and we say it's going to be the billionaire class. That's it. And I know that's not intuitive, and that's not the way we'd like to look at it. But if you look at the People's Summit this weekend and the growing energy from masses of Americans saying we're done with this. This system does not represent what our country is all about. There are some wealthy people who are also a part of this kind of movement, but the reality is Wall Street has controlled our political process and front end to back end. And either we have to get the big money out of politics in the first place. It's hard for us to foresee the day when we can actually move on climate justice, move on Medicare for all, move on other economic justice, racial justice, voting irregularity, and all those things, unless we get the big money out of politics on both sides of the fence, because it's just absolutely corrupting everything from start to finish, whether it's party politics or whether it's governance.
What would you consider an achievable and a win at the party convention? What are the objectives?
Wow, that's a good question. I think the objectives would be that we see a platform, and I know the platform is largely seen by many as a symbolic document, that people put things in the platform and then they don't hold to them. But the reality is having a platform that reflects an agenda like the agenda that Bernie Sanders put forward. We already saw in the campaign instances, for instance, Social Security, where Bernie would talk very effectively about not only not cutting Social Security, but protecting it, expanding it, improving it. And Hillary had to move her position in order to sound a little bit more like she wanted to protect Social Security and help it grow and expand. That's the kind of influence and power we want to put on the platform process, so that we say, if the DNC and the Clinton side of the aisle wants to really embrace the Bernie revolution, they must do so in a meaningful way, and they must do so through making the platform reflect that agenda.
Well, it's clear they don't want to.
I know they don't want to.
What can you force out of this
well,
that will be meaningful?
We don't want to support an agenda that supports the billionaire class. So is there a little bit of a standoff right at the moment? Sure. But if they don't want to fight on the floor, If they would not like to have a fight on the floor in Philadelphia, the best way to have that not happen would be for them to put forward the kinds of platform changes that are real and meaningful and a commitment to making them change. To have Hillary Clinton come out and say, never ever will the United States achieve single-payer Medicare for all. That's a pretty sweeping statement that supports the billionaire class that takes care of our healthcare industry right at the moment, or doesn't take care of us, takes care of our healthcare industry.
Well, she kind of once said in one of the debates, yeah, we'd all like that, but my way is the way to get there. So she can use language.
I don't think you believe that.
No.
I don't believe that.
No, I don't believe it.
I don't believe it. You know, the reality is, you know, you can't, you look, how do you predict future behavior by past performance? So you have to look at the behavior that, you know, that has been displayed over time by Hillary when she's confronted with really, really hard decisions to make on the healthcare agenda.
One of the critiques we're hearing is so little on foreign policy. Really, Tulsi Gabbard made one foreign policy speech, but did not mention Israel-Palestine.
No.
There was one breakout panel Phyllis Bennis was on.
Yes, correct.
Where she obviously talked about it.
Yes, correct.
But generally, the whole foreign policy thing has not been much talked about, even though, as I say, by Sanders being represented by Cornel West, they're making it an issue.
Well, it should be an issue. I mean, the other thing that I've watched at the summit that, in my view, we needed to talk more about was gun control and gun violence. There was very little. There was one African-American speaker who spoke about gun violence. I think Nina Turner also mentioned gun violence. So, but similarly, international issues and gun violence tend to be things that people get nervous about bringing into the conversation. But here's Bernie, who, isn't it remarkable, is the first Jewish candidate for the presidency who has this principled position on Israel and Palestine that I think many of us would welcome moving forward, and to put Cornel West on the platform, it's fabulous to hope that he will fight. You can't imagine Cornel West not fighting for a good position, but to have him fight for that kind of a position, that is groundbreaking stuff. And we would like to see the DNC pay attention to that. The panel that you talked about with Phyllis Bennis was the Healthcare Not Warfare panel that PDA participated in, and then when we feel very strongly about the fact that the so intensely pro-Israel policy that has gone on for so many years has been very divisive to the whole Middle East region. It continues to be. I mean, this is a long, long battle. We can help bring peace to that region, but we have to be more sane about that policy and do it in a more meaningful way. The people of Palestine deserve that too.
Okay, just finally back to the tension at the conference about Clinton. The Sanders campaign says that the people here have to make sure Trump loses, and loses big. Well, the reality is the only way for Trump to lose big is Clinton has to win big. I mean, that is the other side of that coin. And a lot of people here do not even want to vote for Clinton, never mind help her win big.
I know. I've heard that from many people, and I'm going to be very honest with you. I haven't decided what I'm going to do when I look at that ballot. And it's sad for me to say that here I am, a 61-year-old woman who has always wanted to see a woman president of the United States. I think that would be very good for the country. I'm very concerned about some of Hillary's policies. But I think hearing Bernie say, you're right, when he says we have to defeat Trump, but he's also right about that. We cannot have that man as the president of the United States. If we imagine that kind of a country with him.
Well, he may be solving that problem for everybody.
Well, he's every time he opens his mouth, he tends to,
himself.
Yeah, he tends to help solve the problem a little bit. But I think people have to have time to adjust, Paul. I think for PDA, we've never endorsed a presidential candidate ever before Bernie. Bernie was it. So it's not likely that we will come out. And in fact, I can almost 100% guarantee we will not endorse Hillary Clinton. What we will do is work very hard on the down ballot races for Congress, for Senate, and the House, and so forth. And when our voters go to the poll, our PDA voters go to the polls, they will make their own choice about whether or not, and it's a terrible thing to think about, whether or not they hold their nose and pull the lever for Hillary Clinton, or they leave that blank and effectively leave it open to the potential that Donald Trump could win. That's not what we want.
Well, I guess people will look at the polling and make that decision.
Probably.
And maybe by that time.
Probably. I know people who made that decision.
Maybe not such a threat.
2012 about President Obama, people who had voted for him with great joy and great passion in 2008 and had the prediction that he would be much more progressive than they felt he turned out to be. I know a good number of voters who in 2012 made the decision just not to vote in the race. They didn't vote for Romney, but they didn't vote for Obama either. So,
or a lot of people may vote third party.
Yeah, they may. And there will be a significant number, I think, of Bernie supporters who eventually make the decision, if the party is able to transition in this moment and start making those reforms. They can't do it overnight, but they can start making some serious reforms so that they can be starting to make the case to this mass of Bernie voters that, okay, we heard you, we get it, we have to reform ourselves, we're going to ask for your help in doing so, and we're going to know that those policies that Bernie put forward, you're serious about them, you mean that you want them.
And I guess there's already some thinking about a 2020 primary against Clinton making this a one-term presidency.
I heard some buzz about that, but I didn't hear names that I felt were super serious from anybody who, I heard some Bernie delegates who are frustrated, saying, well, what do you think about this person primarying Hillary? I said, okay, now that's jumping way ahead of Philly, way ahead of November, and way out to 2020. I mean, think about 2 weeks ago, would any of us ever have predicted that Orlando shooting would happen the way it did, and that it impacted this political conversation even in the last few days, and should impact it, so that we demand that we do something about gun violence in this country, do something about gun control, as uncomfortable as it may be. Either we start addressing it or we're going to keep having these mass killings.
All right, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Paul.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.